Today's episode is for the sports purist, and my guest is Sam Larner, who is a sports statistician and analyst. You may have seen the film Moneyball, where analytics were used to revolutionise the game of baseball. What Sam's trying to do is exactly the same within rugby. Rugby has fallen slightly behind when it comes to using analytics to predict future events, but Sam has identified all of the stats that can help it to catch up. Alongside that, we get a deep dive into the sports of baseball, football, cricket, rugby and basketball and find out the real key differentiator stats that make the difference at the highest level. I've split this episode into two parts because it really was fully packed and my editor said we couldn't really cut that much out, which is a good sign. However, I thought it was a little bit much for one episode, so I'll split it into two and the next one will come out sometime next week. Enjoy. Sam, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, straight out of the gates, what is the most interesting sporting stat you know?
So there's one in baseball called WAR, which is wings above the placement. And what that looks at is how good is a player compared to someone you could just pick up, not off the street, but who would be readily available. So what it's great for is it's great at working out how much that player is worth to you as a team, compared to just someone that you could otherwise pick up. And it's incredibly useful because you can use it for working out how much you should pay a player. For example, if you know that you can pick someone up for, let's say, $800,000 a year, and this player is worth $10 million, you can work out exactly how many wings they're going to get you, which is ultimately what the stat's showing you. It's saying this player is going to get you 10 more wings if they're exceptional compared to just someone off the street. And I think that what it does really well is it shows the total value of a player, which I don't think really any sport has got aside from that.
Yeah, I think so. Moneyball has probably been the most impactful for sports statistics in terms of a film that's gone to show, hold on a second, we don't need to do things the old way. If we do them like this, we can essentially buy wins as opposed to buying players.
Exactly, yeah.
And so who has the highest, is it WAR score?
Yeah, so the highest WAR would be, certainly recently, is a guy called Mike Trout, who plays for the Los Angeles Angels. Consistently would be getting a WAR of about 10 a season. And he is paid handsomely for that. So he'd be on, I think, about 40 to 50 million a year.
So he's worth 10 wins a year?
He's worth 10
so
wins.
So the score is 10, which means to any team you're worth 10 wins?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. So if you could buy, how many games do they play in?
So they play 162 in the regular season.
That's mental.
It is mental.
But they do play they play back-to-back nights, right?
They do, yeah. So usually they will play maybe 4 or 5 times a week. And so someone like Mike Trout, his value, and this is what's encompassed in WAR, is not just in being kind of very good for a short period of time, but being very good for season after season after season across all 162 games.
Right.
Because you can imagine someone like, in one of his worst years, he might only get 3 WAR, and that's because he maybe has only played a quarter of the season because he's being injured. So it's a great way of showing not just impact, but availability as well, which I think is often missed in stats.
So it's quite an all-encompassing stat, i.e., obviously there's nuance and context of stats, but this one gives you a very rounded picture of someone's value.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's very few weaknesses in it. So you're going to get a low WAR if you're not very good or if you're not available. And ultimately, you should really be able to add up everyone's WAR and it will equal the total that the team's got. And it's really useful as well because what it can show you is we're paying, let's say, $4 million for this guy, and he's performing at a level which is below the placement. So we could just get rid of him and then just pick someone up, and we won't be any worse.
How new is that stat?
So I would say that's probably, that you mentioned Moneyball, that's probably come about in the sabermetric revolution. So that was probably the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
First time I became aware of it was kind of 2010. And probably that's when I started trying to recreate something similar in rugby, which it turns out is very hard to do. Rugby is a hard sport to do something similar to sport.
And that's, I think, we'll talk a little bit about the adoption of statistics in rugby and where it's useful, where it's not. But I think one of the reasons that it's been slower to adopt statistics is because it's so hard to model.
Yeah.
Baseball, you have an initiator as the pitcher and a receiver as the batsman. Is essentially a bit like penalty shootout with a few other variables, but on the whole, it's quite easy to model. But with rugby, you have 15 people on either side. you have substitutes that can come on, you have the ball can be passed, the ball can be kicked, there can be a ruck, there can be a penalty, all these things. It's very hard to build a model. Do you think that's why it's been so slow?
Yeah, so it's interesting because whenever I talk about stats in rugby, I get two different answers. Or often from people who don't like stats, I'll get two different responses. So one is it's too complicated. You can't possibly say everything that's going on. And equally, like you mentioned there, we're quite good at measuring kind of ball stats. So who passed the ball, who tackled the ball carrier, who made the carry. That stuff has been collected for a long time now. But the other stuff is, well, what was someone else doing? If someone ran a dummy line or someone did something else which drew a defender away and the ball carrier therefore had more space, we don't really have a way of tracking that. So there is a certain level of truth to that the game is so complicated that stats can only capture a certain part of it. The other response, though, is the stats are so good that players no longer play what they see. They play the stats. I think, as with a lot of stuff, the answer is somewhere between the two. It's a kind of a nuanced balance between those two things. But I think you're absolutely right. That's why it's taken so long, is it is complicated. It's hard to necessarily trust what the stats are saying until you can match up what you're seeing with what the stats are telling you.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I think the only team I've seen to really integrate stats they've all, in some regard, done it. But Saracens, have you heard of the Saracens Revolution, where they sort of changed everything? Brendan Venter, Mark McCall.
Yeah.
So when Brendan Venter came to London Irish, we went through a slightly similar process, but probably didn't get to finish it in the same way. Obviously, not anymore. But I remember Nick Kennedy standing in the front, and he told us of the guy they brought into Saracens to look at statistics. And the thing that always sticks with me now is apparently after tries scored or points scored, which is an obvious one, the next biggest indicator for winning a game was how well you exit your 22.
Yeah.
And that's why Saracens became very, very good and methodical at getting out of 22. Because if you, I do apologise for any non-rugby people for this, but Sam and I's background are both in rugby, so it's going to have a little bit of a skew. But the way you exit your 22 is how you relieve pressure. It's how many shots you're giving them in a pressurised situation. So how well you exit was a massive indicator whether you'd win the game. Yep. So they became really strict. Essentially, don't run with the ball until we're in the other team's half. And if we do exit, we're not just going to kick it out. We're going to put up a contestable. We're going to smash the guy who catches it, make it an absolute shit fight. And then we're going to get you in the next couple of phases. So you're under pressure, we'll probably get a turnover. As opposed to kicking it out, give you a line out that you've practiced and you're set to then attack us with.
Yeah, so I guess in rugby we don't have a shots on target or the shots created, whatever it might be, like they do in football. So what we have is the 22 entries and your ability to exit your own 22. And exactly like you say, there's some fascinating stats in there. So one of the ones that I think really leaps out is if we look at the 22 entries, which you can imagine, if you're not a rugby fan, you can imagine is a bit like shots, is you get those chances and you have to try and make the most out of them. What we see is that there's not a huge difference between the best teams and the worst teams at actually how many penalties or how many tries they can get when they get into the opposition 22. What's different is just how many chances they get. And that's, I think, a fascinating one because it changes how you see the game. Because instead of seeing it as let's run from anywhere, let's attack from our own 22, let's play a really exciting game, it boils down to, well, let's make sure we play in their half of the pitch because we're going to get more 22 entries than they will into ours. And the big, kind of the most useful stat there is the difference between 22 entries. How many do you have versus how many do they have?
Right, so it's less a matter of efficiency and more a matter of volume.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting because I can tell you all the teams I've been at, they all focus on efficiency. It's, we had this many 22 entries and we only converted this many, when actually they should be saying we need more.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, but there will be, so there's quite a small variation.
Very small, yeah. So if we take last year's stats, so Newcastle were an outlier. They were the worst team in the Premiership. So they would get a try on about 19% of their 22 entries, which is very low. But if you exclude them, the gap between the best one, I think, was 37%, and then the worst, excluding Newcastle, was, I think, 29%.
Okay.
So very small. Not nothing, and obviously you always want to be more efficient, but a very small margin.
So they're all about 1 in 3?
Yeah, pretty much.
Is that for a try?
So that's for a try, yeah. Again, it's similar for a penalty. So for a penalty, it just shifts up a bit. So for the penalty or for the try, it shifts up to about 1 in 2. But again, there's not much margin between the top and the bottom.
That is interesting. And what is the most underutilized or most interesting rugby statistic?
Yeah, so at the risk of blowing my own trumpet here, I think one of the ones, so I created this a couple of years ago called try equivalence, which hasn't really made it that far out into the world, but it's trying here. And so what this is looking at is, it's looking at the productivity of carries. So it looks at how many tries you score, how many meters you make, how many defenders you beat, and how many clean breaks you get. And what we can tell is that we know how many of those you need to score a try. So on average, you need 200 meters to carry every try you score.
Really? That many?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess because on 22 entries,
yeah,
you don't convert them all, so you need to, okay. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and you carry from deep and things like that. As a team, that is. You beat about 7 defenders every try you score, and you have about 1.4 clean breaks. So every clean break you get, you should be converting that about 66% of the time. And what this is useful for is, obviously, if you're the winger and you run down the pitch, you go 95 metres, you get a tackle at the end and you pop up to a slow-moving prop who was stood in the opposition half and he flops over. He gets a try. You get a try assist, which no one really cares about, at least in the media. And so at the end of the year, when we're totting up how valuable you are, we see, let's say, 6 or 7 tries, and we see another winger who's got 15 tries. And we go, well, he's more valuable than you are. But actually, what's that 15 try winger done? Has he just flopped over the line 15 times? Has he gone the length of the field 15 times? Is it a combination of both? And what have you done as well? And so it measures the productivity of the carries, and it says, okay, actually this winger is better. And what this is really good for is it's great for recruitment, because you can say, well, this player, he's creating a load of chances, but he's not scoring as many tries. So we can get him cheaper than this guy who's creating less, but is scoring more tries, who basically those top line numbers are still driving a lot of recruitment. And they'll just go, yeah, we'll get the one who's got 15 tries.
So essentially, if I beat 7 defenders, that's a try equivalent.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who is the best in the world at that?
So the best in the world last year was in the Premiership is Gabriel Ibitoya for Bristol. Yeah. So he benefits partly from how Bristol play. So he's expected to carry a lot from deep. So a team like Leicester will underperform their try equivalence total because they kick a lot. So they will score more tries than you would expect based on try equivalence. Bristol score fewer tries than you expect because they attack from a long way. So they will run maybe 200 metres from their own half, whereas Leicester might only run 20 metres from the opposition 22. So someone like Ibitoya is slightly raised in that regard. However, he's consistently being a very high-level performer at that. Adam Radwan is another one. Plays for quite a poor team in Newcastle, but he still produces a huge number of try equivalents. There's a guy, a name probably not many people have heard of, he's playing the top 40 now for Van, who's called Romanic Camus, and he consistently maybe will score 4 or 5 tries a year, which is not anything to really write home about. But he is incredibly high performing at try equivalents. So he produces a lot for his teammates, essentially.
And if you were to assess international rugby, if you had to have a guess, you might not have run the numbers.
Yeah.
Who would be the highest in try equivalents in international rugby? So
I think when I ran this for the World Cup, Rico Ioane is up there. So Kiwi. Adi Surveyor as well does fairly well. In the Six Nations, I think it was Ben Earl.
Really?
Which you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Flanker.
Yeah.
That's quite impressive.
It is impressive.
Well done, Ben.
Yeah. So guys like that can often be seen to it fits what we see, I think, which is always a sign of a good start. You don't want a start that tells you something totally different to what your eyes are saying, because in most cases that's just not accurate. I don't know if you remember during the Six Nations when there was that stat about how Wales had actually had the better chances against Ireland when they lost 38-0 or whatever it was. And you look at that and you think, I don't think I buy this. I don't buy that stat is actually telling me something useful here.
Yeah. And I guess, like you say, this isn't a watertight stat. It's more useful than try scored. But is there a team that has the most try equivalents, but maybe not the player?
Yeah, so Bristol Bears have consistently the most. Northampton Saints have the most as well. One thing that's interesting, particularly if you're kind of nerdy statty like me, is if you plot this compared to the actual points scored, it's very close correlation.
Really?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when it comes to stats, there are stats that can inform you where you're at, but can't necessarily inform what you do, i.e. we can see that we're doing really well based on these output stats, but what the input stats we can use.
Yeah.
There's one that I really want to get into, you mentioned briefly, about scrums.
Yes.
Take me through that one.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating one. So just to name drop, this was a question asked of me from Matt Tamua, the ex-Wallabies player.
Yeah.
He asked...
Centre.
Yes, yeah. So I don't know why he was interested in
There's
scrum.
no place.
Maybe he's moving into coaching. And he was wanting to know if there were more scrums at the start or at the end of a game. So what's interesting is, as a game progresses, each quarter basically gets more and more scrums. So I think it's 21% in the first quarter, 21% in the second, 26% and 32%. They might not all add up, but it's roughly that. What teams will always do is they will always start their strongest front row at the start of the game, usually play them for about an hour, and then substitute them for the last 20 minutes for the weaker front row. So the problem with doing it that way is across a whole season, across a whole Premiership season where there's 18 games, if you play for the first hour versus playing for the last hour, so if you come on after 20 minutes versus if you come off 20 minutes from the end, you will participate in about 280 scrums versus 240 if you do it, if you start from the beginning and play for an hour. So those 40 scrums, your weaker front row will be taking on compared to your stronger front row if you flip it and bring them on after 20 minutes. So what's quite interesting about this is where stats butt up against, I guess, psychology, because it makes perfect sense to do this. It makes perfect sense to start your front row after 20 minutes. That seems to be completely logical. However, when you speak to players about this, what you get is, no, we don't want to do that because there's something about starting that's really important, that's more meaningful than coming on after 20 minutes. Or you get, we don't want to come off after 20 minutes. That feels worse than coming on with just 20 minutes to go. It's exactly the same amount of minutes that you'll play, but there's something bad about coming off after 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so this is where there's the marginal gain of the 40 scrums that you would have with your best team versus a psychological knockback of doing it that way. So I think that's where it really interestingly hits against each other.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, this is where people kick off about stats because they go, no, can't do this. Like, no, this is just to help inform a decision. But the things you think are, okay, well, what if someone gets injured?
Yeah. Because
that needs to be taken into account. And then also there's more to a props game than just scrummaging. Although, I don't know if there are stats on this. Is that the most impactful part of a props game? Yeah,
it's an interesting question. I think that there's other stuff as well that is probably not as impactful, but I guess the difficult challenge is that you'll have some games where there's almost no scrums, and you'll have some games where there's an absolute boatload, and there will be impacts like one of the things that we don't measure too much, or certainly doesn't make it onto the TV, is how many looks do you hit? Because if you're the one clearing out the look, creating the quick ball, then that means someone else can be more effective when they actually carry it. So that's one of the things that props do a lot of, which is, I guess, would be considered unseen work, which people just don't really take.
But with the scrums, for me, that's really interesting because the goal of bringing in a really good scrummager is to have them face as many scrums as you possibly can.
Yeah. And
this would imply that people, the risk aversion to why have you not started your best prop, there's pressure that comes with that.
Yeah.
Or the player, I want to start the game, I'm the best player, I want to be in the start 15. It's like, well, actually, we want you facing the most scrums you possibly can over a course of a season.
Yeah.
As opposed to one game. Maybe if it's a massive game, maybe we will start you. But across a season, we need you to face as many scrums in the same way that in a single game in the NBA, you might want to take a lot of mid-range shots because of that game. But across a season, you now certainly want to be taking more 3 points.
Yeah.
And that's another area which is, I'd say, fairly common knowledge now, where 3 points on average statistically will lead you to winning more games across a season than taking more 2 points.
Absolutely. There's some fantastic kind of graphs that people have made showing the number of shots or what the location of shots taken before
Shot distribution,
before maybe 2010 and then after, and it's basically moved from entirely within the 3-point mark to entirely outside basically now, and that's fundamentally changed the game, and that has changed because the stats say it makes more sense to take the 3 points.
And I would imagine that people knew a little bit about that stat and didn't do anything until Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Who then comes in and is just firing them off with Klay Thompson. Suddenly people go, are there any stats behind that? Oh, there are, and they're doing it. Okay, now we'll adopt it.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, it needs that nudge. You look at the Oakland A's in Moneyball, those stats were around. The guy who wrote a statistics book he was a pariah, and it was like, this guy doesn't get baseball.
Yeah.
And again, it was put to the back until someone did something about it and proved it could work. Someone that could take a bit of pressure for a long period of time. And now it's common knowledge. And if you don't do it, you're a fool. In the same way with 3 points. And I wonder, what will it be in rugby where someone has to take a bit of a risk and start doing it? But again, why do people not do that? Probably pressure.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Italy in the Six Nations a few years ago, they were the weakest team. They're getting stronger now, but they were the weakest team, and they did something similar. So they started a weaker set of front row for the first half an hour and then brought on their stronger one for the last 50 minutes. And they lost equally by as much as they would have if they'd have, when they didn't do that. And so you look at that and you think, well, that's kind of dead in the water now because a weak team has done it and it hasn't made them any better. But I think with a lot of stats, you're playing not against whether it's right or wrong, but against people don't want to look stupid. And so, for example, if I said when you were playing rugby last and I said, actually, you will save by being more aero. If you wore really short shorts and really long undershorts, you would save like the equivalent of running 400 meters in the game. Yeah, I don't think that's true, but let's say that's true. I don't think you'd have done it because you risk looking stupid, and that is such a high bar to leap over that a lot of people don't want to do it. And it's the same with coaching. Coaching, if you do what everyone else does, you might not be successful, but you won't look stupid. But if you come out and say, my football team, we're none of us are gonna go up to the corner because actually corners have incredibly low success rate. So and you can see a lot of goals by escaping out the defence escaping out the penalty. So if someone say, let's just every corner we get, we'll just send one person up there, our tallest guy, and we'll try and hit him in the box. If we don't, we'll all be back defending. You then risk looking stupid. And so a lot of coaches, even if that was perfectly legitimate, would go, I'm not going to do it because I need to be able to explain what I'm doing to a fan. And
that's, I think, firstly, rugby as a sport has so much casual ambiguity. So it's very hard to isolate things. So no one really knows what exactly it was. But the same thing happens in penalty shootouts. So I did a statistical analysis of penalty shootouts during the Euros. And one thing I found that surprised me was the most likely place, if you shoot for this spot, you are most likely to score, is the top corners. So you don't actually, but if you don't score, you won't be saved. You're never saved. You'll miss. But to miss a penalty is so much worse than to be saved, i.e., you couldn't hit the target. So people, even though I could tell you so many times, aim for the top corner, it's the most likely spot for you to score a goal, won't do it because if I miss it, the consequences in my mind are a lot worse. And they probably are. You get people sat at home like us going, oh my God, you're a professional footballer. Eating your popcorn. You're a professional footballer. Just put it at least on target. So again, that's an area where I can tell you statistically that's what you should do, but you won't. It's interesting. There's, so in cycling, there's a guy who used to be he actually broke the hour record, a guy called Alex Dowser. And he got very into aerodynamics, and he worked out if you wore, the silly looking helmets that are kind of fairly pointing and got no vents. If you wore them against someone who was wearing a normal cycling helmet for the last maybe just 300 minutes of the race, if you go in the same effort, you will gain 70 centimeters maybe. And he said this to his sprinter, and that's basically his job. He rides 100 miles, then all that matters is the last 300 meters. And he said, how many times do you think you've lost by less than 70 centimeters? And he said, maybe 2 or 3 times a season. And he said, well, if you wear this helmet, that you won't lose those games. You'll be three more wins in a season, which is massive. That's massive financial incentives to do. That's massive for the team.
And he gave him this, and the guy was like, that's amazing, that's fantastic. And then he said, so are you going to do it? He went, no, because I look stupid, I look like the only one doing it. And imagine if I lose and I'm wearing a helmet and I look stupid. So I think that's one of the issues, exactly as you say as well. There is also that causal link, and there's that factor of, well, maybe I'll get too hot in the helmet. And so there's all these other factors that sometimes stats guys, we forget about. There's a human as well. And that's one of the things that probably analysis forgets too much of. So in rugby, for example, I'd been around guys who are data scientists, so they know what they're doing, and they pulled out this amazing report, 4 or 5 pages long. It's saying what you should do in certain situations and how you can beat the last man and what happens if there's 2 passes instead of 3 passes and all this kind of stuff. And you look at that, you think this is amazing work, but what's it for? Because if I give that to you and I say memorize this loss and then go and play that game, you won't know what you're doing, because you won't be able to read what's happening in the game and remember what was in this massive pamphlet. And so analysis is always going to be limited in game, at least, by how much you can put into a player's head. And you don't want to overload it, because then you end up with them just not knowing what they're doing.
And that's, I guess, where it comes to a bit of a difference between a seasonal strategy or potentially multi-seasonal strategy and a single game strategy. For example, someone like Rassi Erasmus seems to be very good at single game, i.e. he'll come up with really clever little tactics, but once you've used them once, you probably, maybe that's it, like his, 7-1 split or something. Okay, they've caught us off guard this time. Next time if they do that, we could probably actually exploit that. And then you have seasonal strategy. So across the season, we know if we kick the ball this many times in play, we will probably be likely to win 75% of our games. That said, I actually saw what the win percentage was in the Premiership last year. I think it was something like 69% was the best as Northampton. So even then, you're still losing 31% of your games. And the worst team was Newcastle. Was it
0%?
Did they not win a game?
Yeah, you win a game.
Oh, I discounted them.
Okay.
I think it was
Gloucester.
It was not
6 maybe or something.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I think I did the same as you. Newcastle. I'll ignore that. It's an outlier. It's an outlier stat. But it was tough because they were. I remember a time where they were in the playoffs. Next season they got relegated.
That's an interesting season. So that was 2017, 2018. So that's fascinating, because one of the things that we don't talk about enough is luck. So if you look at that season, the best measure, obviously, is the actual points you've won in the league. The next best measure is the points difference. So more or less, every league table you look at will have the team with the highest points difference at the top and the team with the lowest points difference at the bottom. There will be slight wrinkles in that, but more or less it will be that. Newcastle that year had a points difference, I think, of minus 62. Possibly minus 51, but it was a minus points difference, and they finished 4th. And if you look at how they did that, essentially what they did is they lost by a lot to a lot of teams, and they won by a fairly small amount to every game that they won. So something like 5 or 6 games they won by fewer than 3 points. And you might think that's great, they're a clutch team, they win these games. But if you're looking at something like baseball, that as we mentioned, 162 games, you can see that year to year teams can't consistently win narrow margin games. So maybe one year they win 70% of them, the next year they win 20% of them, the year after they win 30% of them. It's not consistent year to year. And so what Newcastle essentially did, and all credit to them, they rode that wave of luck and they managed to reach the playoffs. But if you were looking at that team and going, this is great, this is the start of a dynasty, or this is the start of something good, you were missing, actually, the underlying stats are saying they are potential relegation candidates. Yes, they were relegation candidates.
And that's something you see a lot in all fields of life, is that review often follows failure. So people will cover up the cracks if they can. We got to the playoffs. We really don't need to do too much here. There's a story about a team that won the Premiership. I won't name it. Team won the Premiership, doing a review of the season, and they were saying, right, what should we change for next year moving forward? And the head coach at the time said, we won the Premiership. We don't need to change anything. We just need to do the same again. And the response was, well, actually, but everyone else is going to be changing to catch us. How do we develop our game? Anyway, he got his way, and they just did the same thing. They didn't win the league again for 12 years. Or around that area. You can't figure out quite who it is. But again, it's like review follows failure. So a company, when everything goes wrong, suddenly will start looking into it.
It does. So I think one of the things that we probably get bored of all the time is coaches saying it's process. We just process with one game at a time. We focus on the process. I appreciate that is
Lies.
It lies and cliches and kind of just repetitive. However, there's a certain element of truth beneath it, which is you can't actually decide if you win a game or not. What you can decide is, can I produce the performance that might get me a win? So, for example, I'm playing at grassroots rugby, and we don't know what team's going to come up. Like, we don't know, our availability is different each week, and the opposition's availability is different each week. It's as far away from professional rugby as you can get. Yeah. But all you can control is, do we mess up? Do we drop the ball? Do we make our first up tackles? And is our line out pretty good? And if that's consistent week to week, it doesn't really matter what the score is. Obviously, we want to win, but what we can control are those functions. And as the higher up you go, obviously there's more certainty in, you know, what your team's going to be, you know what the opposition's going to be. But ultimately, you know, when you were with Wasps or when you were in Seattle, you can't actually just through sheer will win a game. You have to make sure the performance is there, and then everything comes after that. And I think that often you see this with commentators. You know, football, for example, people hate short corners, and when there's a short corner and it doesn't work, they will go, "That was a stupid idea." When there's a short corner and it works,
brilliant, straight off the training part.
Exactly, perfect idea. No one bats an eyelid. And I think what a lot of people think about is they just look at what the outcome was, and they go, "Good outcome. The whole process was good." Whereas you will have experienced this all the time, where you know there's a kick, a terrible kick, but it's held up in the wind or it's bounced just right, and the tries come off it, and all week people will be going, "That was an amazing kick. That was such a brilliant kick," compared to another kick where everything's gone right. It's a brilliant kick, but the wings just carried it into touch, or it's just an amazing catch by the fullback who's jinked that through and run back. And those two things actually, you know, the outcome is different, but one was the right idea, one was the wrong idea, but the outcome, was different.
The other really interesting thing you say there is I've seen the difference between a really good coach and an average coach. Yeah, is when they review a game, they look at the team they just played and they see an opportunity that, okay, well, this team scored against this team by doing this, so we're going to do that. And you go, well, they're a professional team, maybe they've plugged that gap now. Yeah. The best coaches pick things that the defence hasn't identified, that hasn't been exploited. And that's that difference in, okay, that's easy to spot. Again, a commentator or a fan might be like, let's do that. On that, though, there's one move I've seen that people do, that a team did every single week, that you saw it coming and you couldn't do anything about it, mainly because of one player.
I can imagine the Sexton loop.
Not the Sexton loop. You know, okay. That's actually, that's a good example, is actually Cipriani with the 9 to 12 out the back to 10 with winger on the shore, 15 wide. I remember I think I was at Wasps. We prepped, so I was running the 12 role, and we prepped all week, and the team smashed it every time. Yeah, we've got this lockdown. We know what Cipriani's coming with, and then he ran out on the weekend and he scored. Yeah, and we knew it was coming. Yeah, it's one of the very few times where you kind of, unless they've got a really strong wall or something, you know it's coming. You couldn't do anything about it. That season he was on fire.
It's fascinating. Those things are really interesting because some of the best stuff that happens in rugby. Because I think a lot of people, when they think about analysis, what they expect analysts to be doing is we're looking for those little gaps and we're going, oh, you know, actually, when he turns his hips like this, that's when you should go down the outside. That means he's going to come in, so you should run down the outside. And when he does that, it means he's expecting you to pass. So if you don't pass, but again, the issue there is it's just limited by what you can understand. So you're looking at
and how much you can process in that time.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a bit like with cricket, where if I say to you, when the ball pitches 6 yards away and 4 inches to your right, it's a great opportunity to drive. And it's like, okay, great, theoretically great, but I'll try and remember that when it's 85 miles an hour coming at me. Yeah, and under pressure.
Exactly. And situational pressure of the game. And actually, if I get out here, we're screwed because then it's just a tail. So that's the interesting thing about training. I think people don't understand as well, is that you have to train slow to play fast. Yeah. So I have to see this shot slowly and get it wrong X amount of times so that when I play it, it's not going to be conscious. Yeah. A lot of people think when you're playing, it's quite conscious, and there are some things that are, but there's that fast, slow thinking. I need to do this X many times slowly so my subconscious can recognize it. Yeah. Because when you watch table tennis players, they're not thinking about the shot, they're reacting.
Yeah.
Same with, it must be with cricketers.
Well, apparently, so the research on this is if you put a decent club cricketer next to, say, Joe Root, and you just have a bowling machine, it just fires balls. Within a couple of hours, the club cricketer, if you didn't know who was who, you wouldn't really be able to spot the difference between them. Maybe Joe Root looks a little classier, but they're both hitting the ball, essentially. But if you then replace the bowling machine with an actual bowler, the club cricketer is just nowhere. Because what Joe Root's doing is he's spotting what the bowler's doing. He's reading what he's doing. He's seeing these thousands, millions of images in the past. And you go, okay, when he's coming in like this, I think it's going to pitch, up at me. So I'm going to stand back and I'm going to whip it off leg. And I think that's the thing with any professional sport, but let's take professional rugby, is when I'm sat at home, I can read the game quite well. I can see, okay, there's space there. I think they're going to kick. And if he kicks, that fullback's going to be pulled out of position. When he kicks it back, there's going to be space to run up the other side. But I couldn't do that in a game. I couldn't stand there and go, okay, yeah, so I kick here, I wait, and then I run back the other way because my kick would be rubbish. I wouldn't be quick enough to get into space, even if I could read what was going on. So that's one of the things that professional athletes have, is that ability to not just be good at be quick, be big, be good passing, all that kind of stuff. But actually, the core skill is you can see what's going on. And I think, to be honest, if you take a bit of an element of that into like a business setting, where you think in a business, a lot of what will happen is people will review stuff when it's not worked, as we kind of talked about. They won't really review it where it has worked. So if a sale's gone through, but the salesperson was late to every meeting and did a terrible job and didn't follow up in time, but the people were so impressed by the product that they brought it. No one will go, okay, hang on, we need to review this because that wasn't good enough, because that won't consistently work. And I think that ability to kind of see the bigger picture and know what's happening, not just next, but 3 or 4 moves down the line, is really what separates professional athletes from normal people, and I think professional and successful businesses from less so.
I think you're right. I think that's the thing that annoys players the most, is when people tell you what you should have done. Yeah. And it's like, well, obviously now I watch a game of football and I do it. I'm like, why didn't you play that through? Well, I can see. It's like you're watching this sort of, they've literally selected the best view of the pitch for the television, which you now have, which also gets replayed, and you go, well, obviously you should have done that.
Yeah.
Come on. But actually, you've got this vision when you're playing where you look, you can only see what's in front of you. You also have the pressure. And this is what happens in a lot of reviews, business as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time, it's quite binary review process. So this was a decision. These were the options you had. What you should have done is weighed up X, Y, and Z. They never really give credit to the situational decision making, i.e., this person is under this much pressure, which means they're going to be much more risk averse, which means they're probably not going to go for the actual right thing that we've just laid out really clearly. But actually, they're also trying to get promotion. They're under pressure from that guy over there as well. And also, maybe this guy's been teased for being too safe, so you might try and play it a bit bigger. So are you creating the environment that leads to decision making properly? Now, apply this to sport. If you want someone to make the right decisions under pressure, you need to train that level. If you criticize people in meetings every week and give them a real tongue lashing, are they going to take the risky option in a game? No.
Yeah.
Because they have been trained not to do that. So you want them to take risks, which means you have to encourage it. And when they get it wrong, if the process was right, you have to reward them for that.
Yeah.
Or not necessarily reward them, but definitely don't criticize them.
Yeah, it's interesting. We see this all the time at grassroots. I suspect it might have even seeped into the professional game as well, where the number of people who will say, only give the offload if it's on. Which is one of the stupidest things you say, because if you're not a rugby player or rugby fan, so an offload is quite a high risk pass, and by its nature, it's never going to be definitely on because you're being tackled whilst you're giving it, and so you can never guarantee that it's actually going to be on. But there will be this idea of, well, don't give it if it's not on. And that creates an environment where you think, well, I can never give this offload because it's never going to be on. By its nature, it's a hard pass. Yeah.
And on that, I would say, if you want to become a good offloader, the best way to do it is make thousands of offloads.
Yeah.
Because after doing that many times, you'll start to learn naturally when it's on or not. Yeah. The way you're falling, you'll feel it subconsciously. Oh, I've got time here. Oh, I've slightly hurt the guy. Oh, I've not heard anything. Maybe I'll hold that. But it will happen like that.
Yeah.
Which means your body will have started to learn the right cues, and you still might get it wrong, but but you'll only get it from doing it enough times.
Yeah.
So you can do the little training on the pads where you go down, you're about to execute an offload.
Yeah.
That's not training the skill.
Yeah.
The skill is getting the feeling of when it's on as you play. So when you're playing at a younger level, make the kick, make the offload, make the thing as many times as you can. You'll start to get the feeling for when it's on. Probably like a cricketer when they play.
Yeah.
Probably when a footballer, when he makes a cross, when he makes a this, he'll feel the right sort of thing and the cues will naturally come in, but you have to do it enough times.
It's why sometimes the best players don't make good coaches or pundits, because they don't actually know what they're doing. It's not like they're going, when I get this ball, I'm stopping it with my foot and then I'm looking up and then I'm moving it to the right and then I'm passing the ball. None of that's happening. And it's the same like with, when we're driving, it's not like you're thinking, I've got to stay on the left-hand side of the road and when I get to this junction, I'm going to indicate and then I'm going to go round. No one thinks that because it's just second nature. You just do it.
You've done it enough times.
Exactly. I think there was a stat that something like 15% of, I suspect this was probably men, but people thought that they could score the goal in the Premiership if they were given a whole season of games. It's quite tempting to think that because you think, well, eventually it'll come to me. I'll just put my boot through it, it'll go in. And there was a clip at the start of last season, I think, where Yuri Tielemans, Aston Villa midfielder, in a friendly in America, wore like a body camera type thing. And you realise that there's I wouldn't even get a touch because the speed, and just in a friendly, the speed that the ball's coming and that someone else is immediately on you is just impossible.
The thought that you could get a goal against a professional defender, no matter what level you're at, is just delusion.
Yeah.
I mean, I've still thought that as well. If you put me up front for Man City, I'd get a goal.
Yeah.
I'll score a few goals.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'd be marked out of the game because my movement would be so amateur that this defender would be like, I'm defending this guy. It's like defending a child.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's the same in cricket. I said to a friend of mine, Joey Speed, here you go, shout out, how many balls do you think you could face against Mitchell Stark cricket? And he's like, I'd like to think I could make it through at least 4. I was like, no chance.
Yeah. You're
going out first ball. The only way you're not out is if he misses the stumps.
Yeah.
If he wants you, you're gone in 2 maximum.
Yeah.
There's no way. It's like, could you hit any runs? Not a chance.
Well, it's the same. I mean, I really like cycling, and one of the great things about cycling, which is probably unlike most sports, I guess you get a bit of this in golf, maybe a bit of it in like running or athletics, is that you can exactly compare yourself to a professional. So there's a climb near me up in Yorkshire where the Tour de France went over in 2014. So I can exactly compare how good I am to a Tour de France rider. And it was not like the end of the race, it was just mid-race. So if I went flat out, I should have an advantage because they're not doing it. And I'm not nowhere near, like not even within the same postcode of these guys. And that's, I do it a lot. I like to think I'm quite good at it. And there's people who do it more who are also nowhere near. And even if we were near, we're near for like a 5-minute block going flat out.
Yeah.
They're doing it for 4 hours. And I just think that the difference between the professionals and amateurs is just so stark. But one of the things you can do is you can look, where the amateurs probably can have some input is in things that the professionals aren't experts at. So analysis and maybe to a certain extent tactics, because obviously it can be tempting to you're a professional, you know what you're doing, but maybe occasionally there's outside influence that can come in and say, have you thought about doing it this way that you just weren't thought of?
Yeah, and I think that rugby can be a bit snooty around that. And I think that's one area where rugby isn't great. I think our punditry is all a little bit too complimentary. You need a few pundits are there to actually elevate the game, not to flatter the players. And maybe not the best thing to say, but you look at other sports, the pundits almost carry it. They have people with opinions that annoy the players. They do this, but you need that. And you have people doing all this analytics online for this. Rugby doesn't really have that.
Yeah, it doesn't have that. Yeah.
You do it.
Yeah.
There's, is it Squid Rugby?
Yeah.
He does it.
Yeah.
And there's a few others, but there's not a lot.
So I think when I started doing it, there was a guy called Murray Kinsella who was over in Ireland who was doing it.
I remember seeing that now.
I'm not sure if he's still there, but at some point he moved to Australia, I think, to do some analysis with the Australian team. There are a few people out there who are doing similar stuff. But yeah, it's limited. I think part of it is the access to data is quite limited. So I work with Oval and so I get the data. But if you don't get the data, it's very hard to find that stuff out there. And if you're going to make really informed decisions, you need a chunk of data to say this is the right way forward. You can't just watch one game, watch New Zealand playing Namibia and go, oh, New Zealand carried out their 22 10 times this game and it worked every time, therefore every team should do that. Because it just doesn't work like that. There was a great baseball podcast I used to listen to called Effectively Wild, and they kept having kind of really smart, just pundits who written interesting online articles. And I was amazed how every time, about 6 months later, they were off at a club. A club had hired them because they were in this thing. And that never happened. So I've done some bits with clubs, kind of ad hoc stuff and gone in and met people and talked through some of the stuff I've done. But speaking to guys out there, maybe there's 2 or 3 who've done that. Not normally the biggest names that you'd imagine, because a lot of the stuff that we might be able to offer clubs is more nuanced than just look at this amazing try and like a video on the try. It's more about the actual stats, because obviously the analyst can look at the try and explain why that was worked.
Yeah, and I think there are areas where professional rugby is not actually that professional. And I think recruitment is one of those areas.
That is where we'll leave it for this week. Do stick around for next week's episode, where we delve even deeper into the world of sports and sports analytics and how recruitment can be utilised to get a real edge. As always, thank you so much for listening.